I didn't really like Dune. I wanted to like it, and I went to the movies, happy to go to the movies and wanting to see it, and ready for it to be anything cool it wanted to be. But it kind of fulfilled a lot of the fears I thought it might fulfill based off of the last one. I think they had a lot of great elements here because, they got a bunch of very high profile, very respected actors, and they got, a great auteur in charge, and they got a lot of money, and they got a lot of financial backing, and it seemed like, they were dedicated to saying, this is going to be really great, it's going to be the new thing, it's going to be everything you want a big piece of popular art based on literature to be, and instead it kind of wasn't. I've been thinking about this because I'm working on something that is not dissimilar to Dune in a number of elements. And so I've been thinking about, just the work of adaptation, but also execution and verisimilitude and tone and how to create a believable world in a world that isn't real very overtly. And, one thing that's become apparent looking at this in the history of things like this is like a big headliner cast and an auteur and a bunch of money will get people to show up at the start. It'll probably make sure the movie isn't a loss, but those things just by themselves will not make it a phenomenon. Product has to be very good by itself, and it has to draw you in, and it has to have you telling your friends about it because of how absorbed you were, and it needs to do that in a bunch of ways, and this film didn't really do that. I think the challenge Dune 2 faced is the challenge that a lot of things adapted from literature face, which is that the tone in the book, while maybe it works, it can come across as perhaps rather dry or rather alien or rather boring on the screen, even if it's a big fancy sci-fi or fantasy world. But what good adaptations do is they go in and they look at the characters and the world and the core elements, and they find a way to extrapolate on them and make them more human, something that can convince you it's a real scenario. And when they do that correctly, the themes of the story are dramatized and pop out in your mind and you understand it and it's powerful. But this film didn't really feel like that. It felt kind of like an abstract music video. No, it was a bunch of people kind of looking at things, being sad about things, and some music playing and lots of vibes and lots of looks. And there are things that were memorable about it. I'm sure everyone will say, oh yeah, that one moment in the movie or that one thing we saw in the sky or on the ground, that was memorable. That's going to be in my head. And that's great, but it's not enough to just have a couple weird, memorable things that you think about. It needs to be memorable in a million ways. I think they kind of handicapped themselves splitting the first book into two movies, because all the buildup of the first movie kind of dissipated, and most especially, the relationship with his father dissipated. They made a big deal about, oh, he has a close relationship with his father. Then, they just dropped it for 2 years and came back and said, oh, you still care about that, right? And they didn't really do a ton of work in the film itself to remind us of these things or make us care about them. And so I couldn't get invested in the vengeance. And maybe this was just logistics thing. Maybe, maybe they said, oh, you can make the books, but you had to adapt them into a trilogy. They can't just be 2 parts. Or there could be a million things. But in practice, it didn't really work. Time will tell what will happen to these films. I could see them, being a success, but is it going to be the world-capturing success that Warner Bros. And Legendary and the creative team probably want it to be? I don't know that it will.